Turkey, Indonesia, Palestine, Mexico. Fantastic. Super.
Excellent. Should we start, Sue?
Yeah, certainly I will. Yes, thank you, George. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm watching all of you joining the session. Still, I'm absolutely delighted to see so many from so many different countries of the world joining us today. And I'm absolutely delighted also to be joined by our panelists for this roundtable on internationalisation in higher education. So my name is Sue Trory, and I am joining you today from Cambridge, where I head up the higher education and adult team for Cambridge Assessment English. And I'm also joined by Dr. Eliane Sagatti Rios from Brazil, Dr. Phil Quirk from the United Arab Emirates, and Dr. Alexander Nani from Thailand. So what we'll be doing today is we will be hearing from our three esteemed guests. We will be not following the sun, we'll be going in reverse order. So we will in fact be starting, going from west to east, starting with Dr. Eliane Sagatti Rios in Brazil, and then Dr. Phil Quirk, and finally Dr. Alexander Nani. So I'd like to kick off then by just introducing Dr. Eliane Sagatti Rios. So we've asked each of our speakers today to spend a few minutes talking about the themes of internationalisation in higher education. And Dr. Eliane will kick us off. Dr. Eliane is PhD Professor in Language Studies and the International Office Advisor at the State University of Northern Parana in Brazil. She is the General Coordinator for the state programme, Parana Speaks Foreign Languages, which focuses on English and French, and the Coordinator for International Projects at Araucaria Foundation, which is the Agency for Research and Innovation in Parana. I'm going to make sure I get it pronounced correctly, Dr. Sagatti. So Eliane is currently a member of the International Chamber of Brazilian Association of Rectors of State and Municipal Universities and Vice President of the Brazilian Association for International Education. Dr. Eliane carries out research on language policies, English teachers' education, and the internationalisation process and impact in Brazilian higher education, in the Brazilian higher education context. So welcome.
Okay, so I think I need to wait to stop the first sharing so that I can share mine. Okay, good. Okay, is it good? Is the presentation on?
Sorry, we can see, I can certainly see your desktop actually. I don't know if we can focus.
Yeah, we can see your files, Eliane,
itself.
Is it okay? Can you see my presentation?
No, just the files and the presentation.
Yeah, so try and go full screen on the presentation.
Okay, I stop sharing and try to share it again. Okay, can you see?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for that. So first of all, I'd like to thank Cambridge Assessment English for the kind invitation for me to bring some perspective from our country, Brazil, our state, Paraná, and the experience I've been in my university, that is State University located in Northern Paraná. So regarding my expertise on languages, as well as the management for the international business in my university, we have both experience in projects considering both language and international development. I'd like to explain a little bit the context where we are in. So we are located in Paraná State. So in Paraná, we have a network of 7 state universities, and my university is one of them. So you can see in the upper right side of the picture of the state in orange, 3 different points where our university is located. So we have 3 different campuses, and we have a total of 5,000 students there. And the other state universities, they are distributed along the state. So we try as much as possible to have a joint collaboration with the 7 of us to impact the development of the state. So in terms of international education in our university, so the international office started just in 2014. So because of that, we started to have a very well planned action towards achieving our goals in internationalization, being better supported by the language policies. We started supporting the Science Without Borders program. So it was the first time that the Brazilian institutions were seen worldwide as a potential for international collaboration. And the exchange process brought to us to better reflect upon the language difficulties our students and also our professors were facing. And in our university, we were the first in Brazil to receive the Researcher Connect project in partnership with the Newton Fund and the British Council to better support our professors for international publication. And all those contexts that I'm just showing you right now, I'm going to have them face to the pandemic and face to the development in terms of virtual collaboration we needed to adapt. So in terms of the Research Connect, we had different projects being developed here in our university, and we focus on the graduate program so that we could better prepare linguistically and scientifically our professors, our students, and our staff. So it's very important for us to focus on the graduate program's qualification, and to achieve that, we needed to develop lots of language improvement programs. So here is some of our network collaborators in this process. We have been working together with the state government in Paraná and other embassies in different countries. And I'm going to focus the partnership very close to the British Embassy, the UK Embassy, the British Council, and Cambridge Assessment, just to give you a few examples of how we work our projects and partnerships facing this pandemic time. So one of our projects that I just mentioned was the Researcher Connect. It was funded by the Newton Fund and the British Embassy support. So of course that at that time we had the presential activities, but then after that we need to face the virtual need to interact with the researchers worldwide. So taking the experience that we had face-to-face to better support our researchers, we started a network, an international network, having our researchers in contact with the researchers worldwide. And it was not easy at that time because they were just used to meeting those partners when they had their international missions. And then we had to better promote in our university those virtual meetings, and then to start discussing how the virtual mobility and the virtual partnership could better benefit the development of internationalization and to better support even if they have some linguistic issues. So from that experience, from the Researcher Connect, we went through the virtual partnership, considering the development of a joint research and the joint and the international network for research groups based on the main areas of development of our universities. So we have 6 master degrees in our university and 1 doctorate. And instead of not having such a great number, we're very focused on the dual degrees with our graduate programs. So since the very beginning of our graduate programs, we try our best to have partnership in different countries so that our students and professors can have this international network of collaboration, and also consider the dual degree by the end of their courses. Also, the second project that we succeed was the partnership together with Cambridge Assessment English, considering the support, the linguistic support for the international development in our university. So because of that, we developed the project together with the Cambridge Assessment English, the British Council, and also other ones, stakeholders in this project. That's our research agency called the Araucaria Foundation. It's from Paraná State, and also the support of the British Council. So we developed this project on behalf of our professors in our university, but also on behalf of the researchers and professors from the other state universities. So being the head of the international office and the language PhD professor, we coordinate several projects, not just on behalf of our university, but also on behalf of the other state universities. So Paraná Speaks English is a state university, and I'm the state coordinator for that. So it gives me some facility to bring the project to our university as a pilot project, but also to include the other universities in this process. So with this project, together with the Cambridge Assessment English, we tried to develop the English as a meaning of instruction in our university as a training for universities professors to better achieve the international actions. So we had professors from different backgrounds, and one thing that was really important for us was to better measure their linguistic potential to support the development of the other activities. And LinguSkill from the Cambridge Assessment helped us a lot, and mainly because professors involved in this research could take the test anywhere they were, but just using the computer. So in pandemic times, this is really important for us because we can take face-to-face proficiency and linguistic exams, but now we need to use the technological resource to better support the development of our activities. So as a result of these projects, we could better understand that we need to have a state policy for the English as a meaning of instruction to better support both the students and the professors. And now going to the virtual scenario, and we need to support all of them in terms of opening their classrooms for the world. So having both professors and students in the same classroom together with the international partners. So this project helped us a lot in terms of international collaboration and also in terms of motivating our professors and the students to interact using the English language with our international partners. And finally, one challenge, or lots of challenges that we're facing in our university, is to develop regulations for the virtual exchange. So it's not easy because we're just beginning our challenge to open the virtual doors for the world of our university. So it means that we need to develop regulations to better support professors and students, and also our administrative sector, so that we can have the credits for those activities. So we are increasing partnerships, considering the collaborative international learning, virtual collaboration, virtual mobility, and the institutional regulation. We need to consider here now we're 100 virtual activities in our university, but I think for the future we needed to consider the hybrid model, both for mobilities and also for our activities inside our universities. So I think the exchange will not be long-term anymore, but will be short-term, considering virtual activities first and then face-to-face activities. And it needs to be inclusive. So our state is joining efforts to better give access to all of our students and professors, considering the inclusive policy for them to have access to virtual classes and to have their advices guaranteed inside their homes. So we need to consider opportunities for all: institutional government effort, access, language, international curriculum, opportunities considering in technology capacity building and virtual experience. So thank you so much. So I know we'll have just some minutes to try to bring some experiences. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eliane. That was very insightful, very, very interesting, I think, to hear your experience in Brazil. And we'll pick up on some of the points that you raised there, certainly about that international collaboration. So lots for us to discuss. However, before we do, I'm going to move first to, secondly, to Dr. Phil Quirk in the UAE. And introduce Phil, who is Executive Dean of Education at the Higher Education Colleges of Technology in the UAE, and has been in leadership positions for 25 years, publishing on leadership, research, appraisal, and journalism. He has recently contributed to 5 articles for the Wiley TESOL Encyclopedia of English Language Teaching, and his collaborative book on reflective writing is available also via WordPress. So Phil's doctoral research on the exploration of teacher knowledge has been further developed into an educational leadership philosophy, DREAM management, I think that's right, Phil, that places students and staff at the core of the institution, and he has deeply influenced his research. This has deeply influenced his research over the past decade. So over to you, Dr. Phil Quirk. I'm absolutely delighted to have you join us also from the UAE.
Okay. Afternoon, morning, evening, everybody, depending on where you are. And welcome to this very short talk. We've been asked to cover 4 key questions in 8 minutes, when I could talk for about an hour and a half on each. Thank you for the introduction, Sue, and thank you to Cambridge for giving me this opportunity. Just to add on to what Sue said, one of the big things that I found in my research is that the wealth of opportunities moving into an online teaching environment has given us for the gathering of linguistic data, and how we can use different methods of language analysis to demonstrate the power of a qualitative approach to a lot of research, and how that can trump, in many cases, broad survey research. But I'm going to take the 4 questions quickly and hopefully leave you with a thought on each of them. So first one we were asked to consider was, what is the future? Traditional 4-year against a blended model. How's that going to impact education? And I think it's making us all look at this breakdown of curriculum, learning outcomes into knowledge, skills, competencies. It's taken a much more competency-based model to all fields of education, including language. And I'm not sure this is a bad thing. I kind of like the idea that we're taking a very careful curriculum development model and breaking our curriculum down in a way that actually allows us to look at a blended format of badging and developing shorter units that people then can compile into what could be accepted as a degree. So that's one of the futures. I think the biggest thing is going to be how it's going to impact us, a bit like today. Yeah, well, one presentation, Brazil, Thailand, UAE. What about the future of the learning space? Is there anything going to stop university mergers, international university mergers? So in effect, we become one university. There's one campus. The way that campus is then imagined, it's not classroom-based, it's learning space-based. And what does that learning space mean when you've got hybrid on there? Here in the HCT, we had 100% online, like everybody from March, but we're now 30% footprint on campus of students and staff. And so what does that mean? That means those lab-based, mini lesson, pedagogy-based, that where a student's competency in a laboratory, in a workshop, in a mini classroom practice session, has to be demonstrated. That's what's coming back onto the classroom, and a lot more then going online. Yeah, I'll leave the dynamic pedagogy and assessment because that's a theme running through while I look at the next question. What is the future? I think the only future we can do is what we've learned over the last 9 months, which is expect the unexpected and plan for the unexpected. Next one we asked is whether we were moving into a modular one. And I've kind of touched on that, where I was saying before, how we can then use micro-credentialing to look at shorter modules that can be built up into a potential degree, rather than this credit-based, classroom-based, slightly Victorian approach to education that we seem to be stuck with. I find it very interesting. Everyone talks about industry-driven curricula, and yet the feedback continually from industry is we want the soft skills. And language almost always been one of those soft skills named. I'm never sure why they call language a soft skill. I always found it quite a hard skill, but we will leave that for another discussion. And again, my focus on dynamic pedagogy and assessment continues. Why? Because for me, that is the future of where we're going with education. We're looking at how we can continually put the assessment power back into the hands of teachers, how they can actually show what the student, the learner is producing. And this is so true in language. We are going to end up stopping the requirement of a learner having to produce a 2.5, 3 hour long snapshot demonstration of their language skill, and instead allow them to demonstrate their linguistic growth over time. And I think with that development of a dynamic pedagogy assessment that is continually growing and evolving and is potentially assessed microly, we end up with a very exciting future, I believe. EdTech, what do we mean by this? So I love the kind of looking at all the different definitions people come up with, and the one that I've pulled out is educational technology creates, uses and manages technological process and educational resources, and then in capital letters scream from the rooftops to help facilitate learning. Technology is a tool. It supports us, it helps us, it aids us. Yeah, but it is not the pedagogical answer to everything. I've always found it interesting, all through my career, from language labs as the new pioneer, computer-assisted language learning, the move to different online. Almost every single major technological shift has seen us take 50 years backward steps. Yeah. So please always remember, technology is a tool. Yeah. It is not what creates learning. And finally, this idea that non-traditional edtech competitors can move in and threaten higher education institutions. I actually think higher education institutions will be threatened more by what Eliane was talking about, and the internationalization, the way we can actually collaborate across where we won't be looking at like here, the higher colleges of technology with 16 campuses across the country. We'll be looking at the international colleges of technology with campuses in Brazil and Thailand, and it's one institution, and it will see institutions and higher education institutes growing in size, but with fewer numbers. That, I believe, is the future. I actually read somewhere not so long ago that by 2050 they thought there would only be 8 universities in the world left. I think that's a bit of an extreme statement, but there is that impact. For me, the real scare of it is watching all this online learning and finding how much of that movement to online has created a pedagogical step backwards. I was doing research with our faculty. We're 24,000 students, over 1,500 faculty, and asking for innovative online activities and approaches people have taken. And the number where they talk about the flipped classroom, and I don't know about many others, but it's that I do not like that term. I was taught always to be a student-centered teacher. If I flipped my classroom, I go back to lecturing. And that's what I was getting now when I was asking for innovative ideas. It was so-called interactive presentations now online, but it turned into lecture online. And we have to be very, very careful. The 2 photos there, pulled off the web last night. On the left, right, I'm not sure which way you look at it, that it's, okay, you've got all the technology tools, and yet what's happening is exactly what's happening on the right. We're still in a situation where a Victorian teacher can come back and join us today, and he'd walk into a classroom happy and be able to deliver his classes. You look at some of the new surgical operating terms. A surgeon from the Victorian era would not even know how to walk into the hospital, wouldn't get to the surgical room, wouldn't know what to do. That's where we should be moving education. That's the future. And if non-traditional ed tech competitors move in, we will only have ourselves to blame. And I will leave you with, so what do? We do what we do best. We be leaders, we be creative, we be innovative, but above all, we remain as student-centered, learner-centered teachers, facilitators, guiders who put our students before anything else. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Phil. Very inspiring, fantastic listening to you. And that photo really is, I think it's so interesting. It makes you really think, how education looks very similar, right? But actually, it feels different, I guess, is what we're saying, but it looks similar. So it's an interesting thing. Let's pick up on that after we've heard from Dr. Alexander. Dr. Alexander Nanny, I'm delighted to also have you join us from Thailand. Again, just reiterating what Phil's just said, that we really are, it's fantastic that we are talking about the same topic, and we can really join and forces and collaborate when we have got very similar experiences from all corners of the world at the moment. So Dr. Alexander joins us from Mahidol. I hope I said that right. Mahidol University International College, where he is Associate Dean for International Affairs, which is in Salaya, Thailand. He began teaching English in Thailand in 2005, and from 2012 to 2018, he was Director of the Preparation Centre for Languages and Mathematics at MUIC. So Alexander holds an MEd in teaching English as a second language from Rhode Island, and an MEd in curriculum teaching, learning and leadership from Northeastern University in Boston. So Alexander, absolutely delighted to have you join us as well. And please take the screen, and we'll join after your piece for a discussion on these topics. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for the warm welcome. And it's truly an honor to be able to speak here today to so many members of the audience and to the other panelists. We have a lot to discuss. And a special thanks to our host, Cambridge Assessment English. So I'll be talking a bit about what we've been going through in Thailand and the kind of COVID experience, the emerging post-COVID experience, because really the future starts here. And the future that we're predicting now, or the possible futures, as Phil said, are very different than what we envisioned a year ago. So to understand where we're headed, it's very useful to look at how the past year has shaped what we're experiencing. So my name is Alex Andrenani. I'm the Associate Dean for International Affairs at Mahidol University International College. We are a liberal arts model college, about 3,800 students. We had 3,500 before COVID. Actually, our enrollment has increased during COVID because many students who normally would have studied in the UK or the US or Australia or elsewhere have remained in Thailand due to travel restrictions. And we are part of Mahidol University, which is an oldish government university. It was founded in 1888 at a medical school. It has about 30,000 students. So the International College is unique in the university in that it's completely English medium. Our incoming freshmen have about an IELTS 6, writing 6, and which is quite a rigorous requirement for Thailand. And we are the only college that's completely English medium within the university. And kind of building on what we've heard from Eliane and Phil about this shift to online education, this transition that we've experienced was totally unprecedented. So in our university, which is a top-ranked government university, before COVID, we'd had very little online teaching and learning. And actually, in our college, we'd had no credit-bearing courses taught online. A few open online courses, but nothing that our students actually received credit for. So this transition to online teaching and learning has catapulted us ahead in terms of technology, but maybe not in terms of pedagogy. And to me, the best lens for understanding what we've experienced is this idea of emergency remote teaching, or ERT. And we're in a very interesting time now because, well, several months ago, we transitioned just over a weekend from teaching on campus to teaching online. We were given very short notice by the government and by the president of the university due to the crisis. We were switched to online. And actually, we were able to quickly get the infrastructure in place and to get the subscriptions we needed. We've been using Zoom and WebEx and Google Classroom and Moodle. But really, we haven't had time to fully adapt to it. We didn't have time to plan it with as much detail and to invest a lot of resources in training our teachers as we would have liked. So this idea of emergency remote teaching as being something just to provide continuity. Now, we did one term fully online already. We're almost done our second term. That's partially on campus, partially online. Some courses are offered online, some on campus, some blended. And we're transitioning towards more of a true online learning experience. And really, it's still not clear what the future will look like in Thailand. That's something we'll get to, I think, when we have our discussion, what the longer term implications of this will be. So we faced some real challenges, and I think that these would resonate in many of your own contexts, where this abrupt transition to ERT was a shock, where our teachers didn't really have training in how to use some of the technology. And actually, sometimes when people are not sure what to do, they'll revert to what is most comfortable or most kind of that they trust the most, that they've experienced the most, perhaps. And in many cases, that does mean just doing more lecturing and less student-centered work. Now, Thailand actually has tried several education reforms since the financial crisis in 1997 and has tried to shift more towards student-centered learning. In our college, I can confidently say it's very student-centered, relatively small classes, liberal arts model, but that's certainly not the case throughout the country. There's been a push towards student-centered learning, but I think in many cases, this COVID crisis and the ERT situation maybe we've lost some ground in terms of pedagogy. The lack of prior experience with online teaching and learning has been an issue for our students as well, where many of our students had, before this crisis, had never experienced online teaching and learning, and certainly not in kind of a higher stakes credit-bearing situation. And so students have reacted differently. Some of them are temperamentally very suited to studying online. Some of them have more discipline. Some of the shyer students have had a chance to shine. On the other hand, some students who don't perhaps have the discipline or who have a lot going on at home haven't really been able to focus and concentrate as much as they perhaps should on their studies. Assessment has been a major issue. So we have an intensive English program of about 500 students at Mahidol University International College, the preparation center where I was formerly the director. And assessment is a major issue. So Phil had mentioned this, the idea of instead of having a snapshot, getting a longer sample of their language performance. But even then, we had been doing more of that in the classroom, but online, it's challenging to get good assessment. And the same thing for actually the standardized tests. So for admission to our college, IELTS is kind of our gold standard. We do accept some other tests, but during COVID, that was suspended, and we had to find some other solutions to try to get students to be able to enter our programs. The digital divide is an issue here, as it is in many places. Almost all of our students have smartphones, but not all of them have easy access to a laptop or desktop. And even for some of our more affluent students, they may be sharing a laptop or a desktop with a sibling or two siblings or three siblings. And during the lockdown for COVID, many of them were competing with their parents as well. So their parents were working from home and the students were studying from home. And so not only were we trying to do online education, but we had to do our best to reach students who sometimes had limited access to devices. And finally, and this has implications longer term, I think, for our internationalization, where entry into Thailand for international students has been difficult. And many of our international students, in terms of student exchange, that's been mostly suspended. In terms of our full-time students, some are trapped outside of Thailand trying to come back. And it's difficult. It is possible to get visas and to get repatriation flights, but it's not always easy, or it's not easy. And although in terms of outbound students, so we've actually increased our enrollment. So we found we're actually, our enrollment is higher, but we're a bit less diverse than we were before COVID. So these are all things that I think may resonate with your various contexts. And I really look forward to discussing these with the other panelists. So again, thank you so much for this opportunity. And that is the current state in Thailand. And now let's please talk about the future of internationalization.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alexander. Thank you. That was absolutely, fascinating. What I think occurs to me straight away is that, clearly you're speaking to us from Thailand, but that resonates very much with the challenges that Dr. Eliani, spoke to us at the start, and also Dr. Phil Quirk as well in the UAE. So we are all united, aren't we, by this situation that we find ourselves in, and we're all facing the same challenges. I think what I was just writing down some words as you were all three speaking, because I think there are some themes, right? What strikes me is that we have sort of logistical, practical challenges, which, in a sense, you have to overcome because you have to keep operating as an institution. But also we've got then that's the future education challenge, right? Which is what we're all talking about today, which is therefore, as we pivot and change to different delivery models of education, what then does that mean for actually the pedagogy and the actual essence of education and teaching? So I guess I want to pick up on that theme really, and I just want to see if we can explore a little bit more around how you think, where we are in our narrative, in our discussion around those challenges. Are we still sort of fixed in the logistical and the practical, or do you think now we can take the conversation to be much more around what the pedagogy will look like, and how we can really think about how technology can be an enabler to what the sort of core values are of education, and therefore we can be international, but also perhaps, as we've just all expressed our concerns around how there is a slight unease that the technology is actually lowering the quality of what we're doing, as opposed to being an enabler. So my question is then, do we feel that the conversation is now more centered around that pedagogical aspect? Have we overcome the practical challenges sufficient enough, or are we still really focused very much on the practical logistical challenges of education? I don't know if you've got any commentary on that, Phil and Eliani. Oh, don't forget to take yourself off mute, as I always do.
I think we're beyond the just response. We're into the point of like there's an opportunity enabler. But what Alex said is so true. We have to be so careful as we were looking for these solutions that we are not suddenly creating a online world which is no longer equal. Devices suddenly the education that should be open to all is suddenly divided again. We've got that problem worldwide more. That's one reason I do like working in the UAE, because they do so many initiatives that do reach out and have done throughout this COVID period, reach out and in ensuring access from countries and regions of the world which don't naturally have access. The Etisalat here has huge initiatives underway in Africa and Asia to communities so that they can have access and bring education to all. Because that's really the greatest fear, I think, is that as we're so excited by what's happening in front of us, we're forgetting those who don't have what's in front of us. So that's the kind of the flag on the shoulder we must watch. But otherwise, it really, as long as we have that in our planning and that in our thought, because when we talk about learners, we're talking about all learners.
Yeah.
Especially when we're dealing with language. Yeah. It's like we must always think about. How can we make sure that every child has that opportunity? And technology really does have that, has the power. We have the power to have technology make that difference as well. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. I don't know how relevant that is, Eliane, to your context, because I'm guessing that the sort of the equitable education is a key theme in Brazil as well, right? To make sure that we have the equal opportunities, for all across the piece.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we're from such different countries, but we're facing the same challenge, So as Dr. Alexander was just telling, I was seeing my own context because the challenge is the same, right? So the difficulties are just the same. So first of all, we faced a very hard time in terms of having access to the technology. So no professors and students were ready to face this educational context. So since not having the right devices at home or the right environment at home, because they needed to share with their families and they didn't have a suitable place to study or work, till the capacity building of delivering the classes from the professors, because they didn't feel comfortable having their image being showed on the screen, and the same for students. And besides that, we also faced the need for the right devices at home. So many students and even professors at the universities, they didn't have a good access to the internet to keep the classes going on. And sometimes they didn't have the advice. So we had such a challenge also for the state that we joined efforts to better support those professors and students to have an inclusive online learning, So we donated devices for low social conditions students, and then we better equipped our professors so that they could better deliver their classes. So that was the first challenge, to guarantee the access to the internet, and then to guarantee they had the devices at home. And then after that, we faced something that people got depressed by staying at home and working together with their families, and they couldn't even open their image on the screen. So we needed to work on that, on their feelings about feeling comfortable for professors to deliver the classes and for students to open their camera to interact with others, So we had some students just leaving the university because they couldn't feel comfortable about having their online classes. So it was really difficult for all of us. And finally, we needed to deliver capacity building for those professors and students to manage the tools, the technology tools, to better support them delivering the classes, learning online, and have the good impact for that. So we're facing those challenges still, but I think we are getting better because now our professors, they are not ashamed of delivering the classes from the kitchen or from the living room or, you know, whatever, because they're feeling comfortable of having a space in their homes to deliver the classes. And the same for students, because they need to open their camera from their rooms. And now they're feeling more comfortable because they see that this is happening, you know, in every class and not just in our university, but in different universities.
And I think that's very interesting for me, because I think there is a, you know, it's coming back to that human aspect, right? And we as educators know that, you know, education is about, you know, the human connection and the human interaction, and obviously language, absolutely, even more so, right? So I think what's interesting there is what you said there, Eliane, because for me, the fact that it's sort of, we've all been experiencing the same challenges, right? So therefore, we may have inside had some sort of uneasiness about the experience of online teaching and blended or different modes of education. But actually, if you're then all sort of, I guess, because of the circumstances, forced into doing that, but then it's a shared global experience. So we're all faced with the same challenge. We're all faced with that slight unease about how we're going to react and how we're going to actually apply all of our expertise as educators to the new sort of delivery model. So that, for me, is where it's interesting, because it opens up a global debate, right? It opens up a global conversation about how we are all, how we can all collaborate together. And again, I want to pick up, Phil, on what you said about the student-centered education, right? So how do we, that's the challenge, right? How do we use technology as in a post-COVID collaborate? I mean, all of the stuff that you've been doing, Dr. Eliane, with all of your collaborations is, for me, key, right? We've joined together. So any commentary on that? Initiatives do you think for us to really start to drive what education looks like using technology as an enabler? Phil, I don't know if you want to come in on that one or Alexander.
Well, I really, really love what Eliane was saying about the human element, but also this you mentioned some students were depressed, and I think and also the human element, which we heard from Phil. But actually, that's something, it's a bit taboo to talk about mental health issues in Thailand. That's something that we're making some progress here. And there's counseling available for students and everything. And I think one positive to come out of this is that actually now we're making counseling available online for students who are having difficulty facing this whole COVID situation. And so this is student-centered, but in the sense of minding the whole student and trying to take care of our community. So it is easy to fixate on some of the negatives of technology, but I think this is one case where we are able to reach some students who otherwise maybe wouldn't be comfortable coming in to get counseling on campus.
Yes, it's the really kind of, I guess, the sort of opening up, isn't it? And the being very open and having the opportunity to be, I certainly think personally, you know, we're all becoming more open, right? We're all reaching out more. But also, I think there is a sense of openness, and maybe what we're now doing is addressing some of those issues that we needed to be addressed in education for quite a long time. I mean, it goes back to Phil, what you were saying in that photo of the Victorian era, right? Now is the time to start having that conversation.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think, you know, there's power in these international collaborative ventures. Eliane put a load up there. We are very similar. We reach out all over the world. A couple of weeks, we're doing it here, and it's that power in the collaboration. But like I said before, and I want to answer one of the cynics in the audience there, putting that I can't remember where it's at all. In a humble opinion, education will always be exclusive. Don't disagree at all. Education has always been exclusive. But we are in a unique situation now in the world where we can collaborate. And we're not talking about putting a few iPods in the hands of a few villages in a poor part of Africa. We're talking about from a national scale and getting people involved. We have Etisalat going into countries and enabling Wi-Fi, having teachers and educators on the ground as well as available at distance. You got these wonderful things there. The Indian, there was the Indian language learners adopting a granny in Scotland, and there's been so many examples that over the years where it's about optimism, positivity, driving that, and collaboration. If we don't work together on it, it will never open up. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's. I just think that the future is so positive because we have this. We've been enabled to reach out, and I mean, just the three of us here as panelists. If we reach out, there's so many things that our institutions could do together that we couldn't do alone.
Yeah. Totally,
absolutely. I love what you've been saying, and actually not just the three panelists, but we have 459 people in the audience. I mean, scattered. We've seen this list of countries, and I absolutely agree with what you've been saying. The future isn't something that happens to us. I mean, this is kind of an inflection point, and we do have agency to help to define the future that we want to see for education.
Yes, and I think just sorry, Elena, sorry.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's time for us to rethink about the education. Having this complex issue worldwide presented to better connect each other and to develop collaboration. So it's time for that. And I think that the pandemic brought to us the potentiality that technology has in terms of online teaching and learning and virtual collaboration, opening our doors for the world in terms of collaboration, international collaboration. So as we are facing the same difficulties, the same issues, so the student-centered is a challenge for our education. So they're also trying to redefine their way of studying and learning, and its impact of the professions in the future. So I totally agree that we need to join forces, to think about this new pedagogy and the impact of what it has in the society and the economy, in the marketplace, because everything will change, of course, from the pandemic time on. And in terms of technology, it brings us a high potentiality to work together with our international partners to develop impact projects regarding the language development and the international collaboration.
Yeah, yes, absolutely fascinating. I think I just want to close. We could continue talking. I know. Oh, Phil, do you want to just come in?
Yeah, I just want to jump in quickly there because
sure.
with the most fascinating thing for me has been not the difference in the classrooms, maybe it's been the differences about the whole institution changing and moving online. So we actually now have a DigiCampus going from counselling. Our sports coaching is now happening online. The libraries on the way that the technology has been used in new ways, and then learning from that and what we can bring into our classrooms as well. Anything is possible. There's the takeaway.
Absolutely, I love that. I love that, and I completely agree. And I think and you're quite right, Alexander. Just looking at the commentary of our 471, people who've joined us today, I think we all feel that, right? That it's like a new opportunity. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have taken part in the conversation and brought you guys together. It's been an absolute delight. I mean, I guess my parting comment is let's keep the conversation going. I think that's the important thing, and it's by that collaboration and the international collaboration where we can really start to redefine, what and make education better and stronger and more equitable for all. So I think there are some fantastic initiatives, and thank you again for sharing your challenges with us. And here at Cambridge Assessment English, we're very keen to be part of that conversation. So it really feels to us that we can.
Thank you very much to all of you. That was a fascinating way to kick off.
Ben, are you there? Evelina, hi. Can you hear?
Yeah,
Let's just do a quick sound check, as Ben said, to say hi to everybody. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Greetings. Hiya. Greetings from a sunny Cambridge.
Well,
it is lovely.
On the change, as usual. Hello, anybody listening in the background?
So this is a live connection now, isn't it, to the world?
Yes,
yeah, we're live to the world, so we can talk to ourselves. Yeah, people might be listening.
And hello to those who are saying hello to us as well. I'm saying Nepal, Malaysia, Düsseldorf, Germany.
Yeah, this is my favorite. It's my favorite bit here, seeing the range of people.
Yeah.
Günaydın.
We're just waiting on the fourth member. So talk amongst yourselves.
Hello, George. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. It's been quite a long day so far.
Yes, well, thanks for this. It's going very well so far. It's very enjoyable. Hello, David. Hello, Sarah. Are you there?
And Anne, you started some very early hour, didn't you?
No, but yeah, it's 4 a.m.
Wow.
There are colleagues from Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam that I've worked very closely with, and they were talking about projects that we worked with on, and I wanted to hear them to see how I can link my talk to their talk. Could you hear me? What I've just said?
Yeah. No. Yep. Absolutely.
We can hear everything, and I think we go on mute when we're not speaking in this. Model of work, but we can keep our videos on so people can see that we're still here.
And for slides, we're just doing share screen at the bottom. That should work, I hope. I always feel the nervousness going between Teams and Zoom and Google.
Screen platforms. Should be fine. Should be fine. Yeah. Excellent. And
the challenge of technology. And welcome, Tim, joining us now.
Okay, we should start in a minute or so. We're just giving Tim the right access.
My screen keeps freezing. Anyway.
I think we can start, Evelina.
Okay. All right, I've been given the go-ahead. I cannot see Tim yet, but I'm guessing he's joined us.
We can see Tim. He's there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Okay, well, welcome to everyone. It's always such a pleasure to do remote events like this because we have the pleasure of being joined by people from around the world. So good morning and afternoon and evening to all of you. And thank you for joining us for this roundtable on the future of education. I am joined, my name is Evelina Golodzi, and I work at Cambridge Assessment, and I'm joined by 4 distinguished speakers today for this roundtable. And they are Nick Saville, Hanan Khalifa, Tim Oates, and Ben Knight. And it's an absolute pleasure for me to welcome them to the roundtable and also to have them as my colleagues at Cambridge as well. So we're going to give the chance to all of them to give us some of their insights on this topic. They will have about 10 minutes to talk, and then we're going to give you the chance to ask questions after each talk. And then at the very end, we're going to open up the conversation to a discussion. So we're going to kick off with Tim Oates. Now, Tim is the Director of Assessment, the Assessment Research and Development Division at Cambridge Assessment. I think that a lot of you know Tim. He's a very well-known researcher at national and international levels as well. His specific focus is on curricula, and he's been involved with reviewing the UK national curriculum in England and the principles behind that curriculum. He also works on researching the quality and function of textbooks and other resources in schools, and that's been taken up by educational institutions around the world. He's also involved with OECD on curriculum matters, and he leads on a UNICEF project, which works on a curriculum, which looks at a curriculum framework for displaced children. So very broad range of experiences that Tim brings to this discussion, and I'm going to give the floor to him now to talk to us about the future of education. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much indeed, Evelina. Yes, and thanks for outlining the sort of scope of the work that we've been doing in our research group. So our credentials do derive from this transnational comparison of high-performing jurisdictions and curricula around the world. We've been invited to do quite a lot of curriculum review work globally. We led indeed the development of principles for the revised national curriculum in England, which has been in place since 2014. And as recently, its performance has been measured in the 2018 PISA study, and I'll refer to that briefly in my presentation. We have also contributed to the revised inspection framework for England, which is looking at curriculum matters. But we've worked on PISA, PIRLS, TIMSS, or the big surveys with OECD, and distilled insights into high quality and high functioning curricula through those surveys. We've contributed to fundamental theory on curriculum for a number of years. So that's the kind of background to the evidence which I'm going to be talking about today. I don't have slides. Because it's only 10 minutes. I'm just going to talk, and hopefully that will be sufficient. Now, firstly, what do we mean by curriculum? We use Michael Erro's definition of aims, content, pedagogy, and didactics, assessment, and evaluation. So often people limit the term curriculum to the content. No, that's not the case. The latest curriculum theory is very expansive. What I want to firstly challenge is a whole series of rhetorical questions, rhetorical statements about the future of education. I think it's been rightly said this morning that the future of education is a question of conscious and deliberate policy and actions. It's in our collective hands. We have agency in how curriculum pans out. It is not something that's inevitable or unfolding without our decision making. Now in that rhetoric, I think there are a whole series of very false oppositions, and we've identified 7 of them. Knowledge versus skills, subjects versus themes, abstract versus concrete, rote learning versus understanding, didactics versus pedagogy, teacher-led versus individualized and student-led, assessment versus learning. Now, we see those as false oppositions. And it's regrettably the case that many people who want to state their view of the future overstate the limitations of the past in order to justify unproven and, in some cases, poorly theorized alternatives. And often they're on one side of those oppositions. And I think Catherine Anderson-Levitt's criticism of a lot of the work on competence-based curriculum theory emphasizes that those who are proposing a particular view of the future emphasize skills, themes, concrete, understanding, pedagogy, individualized learning, and learning, and the right-hand side of the false oppositions as being the future. Whereas knowledge, subjects, abstract, rote learning, didactics, teacher-led, and assessment is somehow on the other side and to do with traditional representations of curriculum and education. Now we just reject that. And we think it's an overstatement of one side of this set of false oppositions. We have to derive a much more balanced understanding of what the assets were of curriculum and education systems in the past, and make sure that we're engaged in systematic understanding of the assets of what we've done so far to make sure that we shape the future in an appropriate way. So overstatement of the limitations of the past to justify unproven futures, that's very dangerous territory in policy and practice. Of course, things don't always get better. Finland's performance is deteriorating fast. So is Scotland's. They both face deteriorating performance. We know that from PISA and from detailed evaluations of what's happening there. And I'll return to that in a moment in my 10 minutes. We do have a moral and technical responsibility to be genuinely evidence-based and ensure scientific accumulation in respect of curriculum policy and practice. Now, we've got to pay attention to the cognitive dimensions of learning, but also to the social and the practical, the cost and the feasibility of what we are thinking about doing. And we've got to pay attention to social, economic, as well as individual needs. Otherwise, we'll build the wrong sort of arrangements for the future. Now, we know that the future will include complex, multimedia opportunities and facilities in respect of learning. And let's just think about what's been found out already through organisations like the Open University that have done that. Their educational approaches, based on solid evaluation, preserve the social dimension as well as the individual dimension in learning. We know that, of course, the relation between the individual and the content they're trying to acquire is fundamental, but elements such as teacher direction, social learning have to be preserved. We also have to have really solidly scientifically based conceptions of young children and adults as learners. You know, some of this discussion about high autonomy following preferences in both style and content is challengeable, particularly in respect of young learners. Young learners, I mean, the whole point of schooling and the whole point of a sophisticated curriculum is to ensure that young people achieve things that are counterintuitive. They're contrary to their normal lived experience. Now, this is quite challenging, and it challenges quite a lot of these romantic conceptions of young children as highly motivated children, highly motivated learners that can be just left to pursue their own preferences. There are real dangers in these very under-theorized representations of learners. We know that learners need access to powerful knowledge, and within the false oppositions, we do emphasize both knowledge and skills. And Michael Young's work on powerful knowledge is really quite fundamental in this. I'll finish on this. Eric Hanushek's brilliant work in the States emphasizes the extent to which we can achieve both equity and attainment, high attainment and high equity through good curriculum theory. In Finland, Aino Saarinen's brilliant work on the way in which Finnish education is beginning to include elements of phenomenon-based learning, quite far over on the right-hand side of skills, themes, concrete, and so on, shows that with higher learner autonomy amongst young people and greater use of digital, we get higher inequalities. We have to pay attention to this kind of empirical research. What I would argue is that curriculum theory is science. We need to engage in systematic accumulation of knowledge and action, not succumb to these false oppositions. We need to confront difficult curriculum decisions about content, for sure, because of the expanding nature of human knowledge. But we do need to pay attention not just to pedagogic theory, but to didactic theory, the structure of the presentation of material, the science of teaching, as well as the science of learning. We do need to pay attention to identity formation in young people, including learning identity. We do need to look at identity formation and learning identity in disenfranchised adults. Assessment and learning I see as something in future as being seamlessly integrated. We need to make sure that progression is available without inhibition, without forms of social status getting in the way. Sure, the future is digital. After all, almost anything is possible with digital, but all of it needs to be informed by evidence on cognition and high performance learning. Sophisticated educational aims need to be present, not just this notion of following individual preferences. Now, if we do all of that, what I believe that we will get is elevated attainment and improved equity. But that's not guaranteed. They will only be guaranteed where we follow the science in terms of curriculum theory, where we follow the insights of really high quality transnational comparison. Remember, sometimes when we are trying to manage the future, things have got worse rather than better. So we need to make sure that we're engaged in this scientific and evidence-based enterprise. Thank you very much, Evelina.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you for sticking to the 10 minutes. That was spot on. Lots of really, really good ideas in there. So I would encourage our audience to put down any questions that they would like to ask specifically of Tim's talk. We can pick them up now, and we can also come back to them later when we do the discussion after the four panelists have presented. And while I'm giving you the chance to put some questions on the board, can I kick off with one question, Tim, if that's okay? You talked about the cognitive and social aspect of learning, which I completely agree with. And I'm just wondering whether you can comment a little bit about how the social aspect of learning is being affected now during a pandemic when a lot of kids are actually at home and not learning in the social environment of school, which might also we see as a way of learning in the future as well, much more individual learning from home. So any thoughts on that?
Thanks very much, Evelina. I mean, it is the case that we do want to encourage learners to have intrinsic motivation, because we know that intrinsic motivation encourages deep learning, extensive learning, and by extensive, I mean young people and adults thinking about the content of what they're trying to acquire beyond the contact time with a teacher or with other learners. So that is essential. But what we're seeing with pandemic is, and it is a bit limited to what we're experiencing now, we need to manage better in the future, this notion of distance, digitally based learning being integrated into schooling for young people and education. What we've seen with pandemic is a rapid and urgent requirement for families to suddenly become substitutes for schools. And I think that's extraordinarily difficult. We send young people to school for very good reason. They're going to acquire things they wouldn't acquire naturally. And many of those things are counterintuitive. Often children are full of prejudices and assumptions which are incorrect about the world, about the natural world and about the social world. And they're at schools to learn such things, that men and women can equally become medics, that men and women can equally become engineers, for example. Young children are full of stereotypes, assumptions, which we send them to school to relieve them of those stereotypes and assumptions. So we've suddenly said that home will substitute for that distance learning will substitute for that. And we've seen real difficulty because we've seen equity really being challenged and big differences in outcomes emerge. So that's what I mean by remembering in true detail why it is that for generations we have said that schooling is important, that formal learning is important. In those settings, the learning is guided by professionals. Peer learning is structured and well harnessed in terms of benefiting both the group and individuals. And it's not easy just suddenly to say that will be delivered in another setting and it will be ensured be assured by digital means. Okay, so we've seen both the good and the bad emerge through what we've had to do.
We have indeed
in the most recent history.
I think, yeah. That's absolutely. We've seen the good and the bad, and I'm sure a lot of parents would agree that they definitely cannot take on the role of schooling their children at home. And we mustn't lose sight of what the purpose of schools is. Yes. Okay, I'm going to turn to a question from the audience from Jefferson, who says, Dr. Oates, what best motivates young kids to learn?
Well, actually, the research is very consistent on this. It's an adult who is very excited by something. E.D. Hirsch gave a brilliant lecture in Cambridge when he was still able to travel, where he said that quite a few bodies of curriculum theory are informed by an over-romantic notion of the structure of intellectual inquisitiveness amongst children. Their intellectual inquisitiveness is conditioned by their knowledge, and knowledge is necessarily very limited when you're very young. And the idea of individuals being guided by people who have their best interests at heart is fundamental, whether they're a parent or a teacher or the manager of an educational institution or somebody designing learning materials. The best interests of young people are represented in a complex way in society. It's not, and E.D. Hirsch and myself share this notion that you can't leave education, the direction in education, simply to the preferences of very young children. Very quickly, they will go down rabbit holes. And quickly, we see young girls, age 6 and 7, saying science is not for them. So what best unleashes intellectual curiosity, inquiry, and a high level of motivation is seeing other people very excited by material, very excited by ideas. Typically, that's a teacher in education, but it can be other adults and young people in wider social contexts.
That's a really lovely thought, how the role that we play as adults through our own intellectual curiosity and excitement about things in motivating young learners as well. Yes. Thank you very much, Tim. We'll leave the other questions for later on. I would like to move on to our second speaker now, and that is Nick Saville. I have the pleasure of working with Nick on a daily basis. Nick is the director of my team. He's the director of the research and thought leadership team. And Nick has a wide range of current interests and research that he pursues. That includes assessment and learning and the role of assessment on learning, as well as how assessment and learning are impacted by digital technology. He's also very interested in the use of ethical artificial intelligence. Nick is also involved in language policy and multilingualism and in impact research as well. So he's going to talk to us today for about 10 minutes on language learning in international education and shaping the future through research into practice. Over to you, Nick. Thank you.
Thanks, Evelina. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and greetings, everybody, from Cambridge, which was sunny, but it's just clouding over. Thanks also to Tim for setting the scene there on a wide tapestry of the future. And I'm going to drill down a bit into the language learning in international education and the concept of how we might be shaping the future through research into practice. And very much picking up on a global conversation, which we've been hearing about the future, one which was going on before, but which is speeded up in response to the COVID-19, what you might call disruption, and how we've been catapulted into remote teaching and online learning and challenges like how to do assessment under these conditions. So this is an ongoing conversation, but what we're now picking up on is whether what's happened will lead us to something which is better or worse. Can we take an advantage of an opportunity here to move forward? In particular, I'm thinking about the impact of EdTech, which has run up and hit us in the face, and the new dimension, which people have been hearing about, which is to do with artificial intelligence. People have been hearing about algorithms versus humans, and what does that mean for us as teachers? So we're in a kind of transition, and we're not trying to make false oppositions here, but we're moving from physical to online, synchronous to asynchronous, tech-fronted presentation, new pedagogies emerging, and there will be inevitably new competencies required. And I'd like to frame this future around these concepts: integrating teaching, learning, and assessment. Asking the question, how can EdTech support better personalized and socially connected language learning? So picking up on the at-home movement, extending it to perhaps anytime, any place. Thinking about the introduction of AI and demystifying that, particularly thinking about specific types of AI, in our case, probably machine learning. And then what do we mean by AI education in terms of the ethical practices and issues to do with fairness? So I'm hoping that we can be shaping a future. And I'm thinking about a future which looks forward, which will involve also a generational shift, looking forward to 2040, where the toddler of today is the teacher of the future, with new mores and new expectations about what will be normal. So we're not thinking about just what will be different, but what will be better. No false oppositions, I hope. The school and classrooms will be with us into the future, but simply putting laptops on the desk of students is not the answer. One device per learner would be an advance, and access to the internet for all would certainly be helpful. So we want to see how we can move forward to make things better. And this has been a challenge in the past, and you may be familiar with this SAMA diagram from bottom to top here. In the past, we've been looking at how perhaps the technology tail has wagged the dog of learning, teaching and pedagogy, perhaps not offering benefits, but simply substituting what's done in one way with another. So I think perhaps with the change we're now going through, we've reached a point where we are going above the enhancement into the phase of modification. So learning and assessment anytime, anywhere, real life tasks, enhanced authenticity, and then pushing it further. New technologies such as eye tracking, augmented and virtual reality. Could we be thinking now of fully integrated learning and assessment where there are no more tests on paper and no more test dates? And finally, where will we be as we go through the next period in terms of a technology that allows us to create new tasks previously inconceivable using AI in education, and in a sense, enhancing the opportunities for language learning that we didn't have in traditional classrooms. So the challenge is integrated learning and assessment, creating a systemic approach which builds in positive impact by design and creates successful ecosystems of learning which link together what goes on in schools and what goes on in society. And this is a model for structuring the research landscape, which I've been using for some time, which sees education as linking the learner to the social dimension of learning, with education playing the role in structuring what gets taught and learned, but extending learning beyond the classroom. At the heart of it is the tasks that we give people to do, the traditional teaching and learning cycle, traditional roles of teachers and their challenges, which we can then enhance and move on from by introducing the technology supported by EdTech. So here is the focus for conducting research, to have hypotheses, check them out, and prove that they work. Using EdTech with AI gives us the opportunity to use the technology to capture data, which we couldn't have before. The challenge is to turn that data into evidence, so evidencing the benefits, supporting our propositions, and working towards the positive impacts and proving what we are claiming. We also need to think about how we can be mitigating risks. We've already heard about digital divide, but there are other challenges. And we need to be thinking about ethical readiness and how we can keep the human and society in the loop as we move to this AI-supported future. So data plus AI is much more than just the tech. And I'd refer you to the work of Rose Luckin on machine learning and human intelligence, very much thinking about the learner at the center, thinking about new forms of helping learners learn, so focusing on metacognition and not just cognition. We also need to think about continuing to work with teachers. And I show you this diagram, which comes from the ECML in Graz, which some of you will be familiar with. It's a very busy picture, which shows all the things a teacher needs to know. And one of the challenges is to upskill under these conditions. But you will see here that informational technology competencies are a transversal dimension. So how can we support teachers to engage in such a way that they can be part of this human in the loop future where AI is supporting us and helping us to provide the evidence of what we're seeking to achieve. So just in summary then, the research landscape is about how we create a virtuous combination of human and machine, which bridges the individual learning which can take place inside and outside of schools, maintaining the benefit of organized learning to create an ecosystem with obvious evidence of better learning. So that's my proposition. And thanks for that. And I'll take some questions on it.
Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you for sticking to the time. I do appreciate that. So keep your questions coming, and I'll kick off with a question for myself. Nick, can I pick up on the last point that you made about the virtuous cycle of the human and the machine? Can you just tell us a little bit more about that? Can you share maybe some specific examples of how that can be achieved in a classroom setting, let's say?
Well, in the school, out of school, in school setting, for example, we all know that if you have 35 people in a classroom, like I showed in the picture, it's very difficult for teachers to deal with each learner on an individualized basis. So it's also very difficult to give feedback on work that might have been completed. So if you want to teach somebody to write in English, you have to get them to do a lot of writing practice. That means setting tasks, observing those tasks, making marks or comments, and then giving feedback. That doesn't take place very often if you have 35 people in the class, because it's just physically impossible. So the challenge is, how could that be done better, supported by the machine or the technology with automated processes that AI can provide? Well, if you can train a machine to work with the learner, as it were, outside of the classroom, when the learner has time to practice, to engage, to be spending time on task, and then the machine can be trained to give formative feedback. What the learner can do is then to see how the learner is progressing by looking at what's going on for each learner, perhaps accumulating all the information about the whole class. So take a learner profile, but then create a class for 35 people, and then work out how to best harness the way that the class time is spent in addressing the issues which are best done together, and then to set it on other tasks which can be set for learners to go away and practice themselves. So it's building on the hybrid model, the so-called flipped classroom, which we're already seeing, but make it more coherent within the kind of expansive curriculum theory which Tim was talking about. So it's about joining things, bridging things. And what the fourth industrial revolution has provided us with, the data and devices, is better opportunities to, by design, create the links, to create the communities.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. I think that's the key point. It's to do it by design, not in an ad hoc, chaotic way, but to know where the machine adds value and to build that into the curriculum and learning process. Okay, I'm going to turn to a question from Louisa, who says, how to analyze in detail the results of the online assessment? And Nick, the link to you here is, how can we use technology to help us get more information out of assessment? I think that's what Louisa is saying.
Sure. Well, I mean, this is the integrated learning and assessment, right? So it's with the task at the center. It's what are we trying to teach? How can we observe what people do when they engage in the task? And how can we create an observation of that task, which is meaningful with regard to some domain of our learning landscape in order to provide the feedback? So if we are looking at progression across a scale like the Common European Framework, we have to set tasks which are targeted at the level of the learner. So it's a constructivist model, which then provides us with insights into what the learner can do. So the learning task and the assessment have to be linked to some kind of overarching scale or some kind of concept of progression, so that when we claim that we are giving feedback which is specific to that goal and that area of progression we're looking at, we can back it up with our research evidence to say, this is why it's the case. This was the theory, this is the data we've collected, this is the validation we've done, this is what happens when we give feedback. And we can show that if we do that, when we're giving visibility of these outcomes, that it actually is better learning, that these learners move forward at a pace. So after the end of the semester, there's a measurable difference in these features compared with at the beginning. Or if not, we know what's going wrong and we can begin to find ways to make it better.
Great. Thank you very much, Nick. Going now forward to our third speaker for the panel, and that's Ben Knight. Ben is going to focus now, bring us to focus much more specifically to how people learn. And Ben comes from a perspective of working a lot in the area of learning. He is Director of Language and Pedagogy Research at Cambridge University Press. And Ben has been involved in leading on academic research on how to develop effective learning materials and resources, so resources with a positive impact on learning. He also has expertise in curriculum development, pedagogic research, and he helps, his work in his team helps to underpin the educational resources that we work on with research-based insights and conceptual methods. So over to Ben.
Thanks very much, Evelina. Can you see the screen? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, lovely, thanks. And
Ben, there is actually an open, I'm sorry, somebody else has opened another,
well,
that's you perhaps?
Yeah, let me just try and move it out of the way.
So we lost the slides now, so you just have to, yes, open it again. Yes, no problem.
Here we find it. It's coming on its way. Okay, got it. Okay, so I wanted to take a slightly different perspective on this question of future of education, rather than thinking about where things are going, really to focus on what we can do to evaluate the ways that education is changing, to see if they're actually helping us in terms of learning. There we go. And one of the things is that it's easy to be distracted by developments in technology, to be excited by them and to think that they're going to take us forward. But actually, what we worry about is that the technology driving it, or is the pedagogy driving it? And people often say it should be the pedagogy driving the technology, not the technology driving the pedagogy. But if you press them on what they mean by pedagogy, they may struggle to articulate what they mean by that. And that's one of the things that prompted us in Cambridge to try and find a way of articulating, of describing what are the insights from the research into how people learn and what is effective into learning that we can share with people who are developing new materials or resources or new technology, or share with teachers so that they can evaluate whether it's actually helping learning. And that's what I want to share with you now, is that project. And so we started with reviewing the literature on the research to understand where there is consensus on what affects learning. And of course, learning is very complicated in terms of cognitive processes, the social interactions behind it, the variety of contexts and motivations that people bring to learning. And so any complete model of learning is highly complicated and full of caveats and unresolved tensions. And we're not trying to do that. What we're trying to simplify in order to guide people at the talk face of education. And so what we've done is to try and extract where there is consensus on the factors that are impacting on learning and what that means for what we can do to actually improve learning. And I say language learning here because that's the context I work in, but a lot of this applies as much to other forms of learning. And when people talk about success in learning, they sometimes talk metaphorically about the combination of head, heart, and hands. And what they really mean by this is that, first of all, learning happens in our heads, in our brains, that at heart, learning knowledge and skills into our long-term memory. But it's also, learning is difficult. It has to be sustained over a long time. And that our success in learning often depends on our engagement with the task, i.e. how far our heart is in it. And also, to be successful, we have to actually enact, we have to do things which enable learning. So it's by our behaviors as well. So that's the hands-on behavior side of it. And if we want to talk a bit more formally about that, we can do cognitive processes, engagement, and learning behaviors as being three pillars which are critical to success in learning. And then within that, what we've extracted from the research is where there's a consensus on particular factors which make an impact on our learning. And I won't try and explain these all, but just a quick gloss on them. When we talk about cognitive load, we're talking about the fact that learning happens via our working memory, and working memory is limited, and often learning is inhibited by overburdening our working memory. So we need to break things up. Consolidation is getting knowledge and skills from our working memory into our long-term memory. Constructive learning is that we're not just uploading knowledge into our learners, students' heads. They have to actively recreate, construct that learning based on what they already know. Dual coding, the effect of the combination of visual and verbal cues. When it comes to engagement, we know that a number of these factors are really important. Self-efficacy, the ability, the belief that we can actually do it. The agency, the feeling of being in control of what we're learning and when we're learning it, how we're learning it. Social relatedness, the importance of our relations with other people in that learning activity. Relevance, the sense that we're more motivated to do something which is useful to us or relevant to our interests. Enjoyment, the amazing insight that we prefer things we enjoy to things that make us miserable. And curiosity, the kind of hardwiredness of our brain about resolving uncertainty. So looking for triggering that engagement by creating uncertainty through curiosity. And learning behaviors, we know that if they can set goals in some way, it gives focus, it prompts action, it breaks the activity into steps. Learning management, using those tools, strategies, habits in order to effect learning. And that we know that people who reflect on their learning, on what works and what doesn't work, are more likely to be successful in the long term. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour of those factors. And what we're trying to do is to present this in a way that educational developers or materials or program developers are able to engage with it. So we've put a very high-level summary of each of these, in this case, self-efficacy, and then a very high-level summary of what the implication of that is in terms of practice. So for self-efficacy, the principle would be around developing learners' positivity and belief that learning is achievable for them by building up the challenge in steps, making their progress visible, and providing positive feedback. So when we're looking at develops in education, in language learning, we're looking for things that will help and support this. It's also important to understand that learning is, of course, not a single action. It's a series or phase of different stages of actions, of activity. And we've kind of simplified that into three main phases: the intake, practice, and feedback. So intake is when we take in or perceive new knowledge or behaviors, which may be subconscious or maybe consciously we are taking them in or perceiving them. The practice is that repetition so that we're able to automate that knowledge or those skills in real time or for real communicative purpose. And feedback is getting that information on how successful our learning has been, where we need to work more on things, or where we can recognize we've been successful. So when we're looking at the application of the principles, we need to also be thinking, how does it apply to these different stages or these different phases? And again, we look at developments in materials, resources, technology. Often they're focusing on different areas, the different phases of learning. So, for example, take an example here of learner management, which is one of the kind of learning behaviors, that general principle of benefiting from using strategies to organize and support learning effectively, strategies, tools, habits, and that we might look at how that applies to intake, which could, for example, be providing tools and exemplars for taking notes on new language, vocab lists, model answers. If we're focusing on practice, can we provide tools or templates for students to plan revision and recycling of language learning? And if we're looking at feedback, can we provide provide opportunities for learners to test their knowledge and skills themselves? So this is how we can use the principles to evaluate what would be useful developments. I was going to just show how this might apply to a particular technology development. This is a kind of app which Cambridge Assessment have developed called Write and Improve, and it's to help students improve their writing ability in English. And the way it works is that you take some piece of writing that you system, and it tells you how well you're doing, what things you could improve. It gives you hints and indications of how you could improve it. This is an example. And some of those hints are quite specific. Some of them are quite vague. They're kind of yellow highlighting, say this could be improved. And then the student can revise it, and then they can resubmit it, and they can do that continuously. So this, I think, when we look at the principles of language learning against this, it ticks quite a few boxes. I think it shows how it can be effective. Certainly, it is encouraging those good learner behaviors of self-reflection, of looking at what you've done and how you can improve what you've done. And so it ticks that box. I think in terms of engagement, it is pretty engaging. Certainly we found this in practice, students very engaged. I think they have a sense of agency because they're able to choose whatever text they put in. They're able to choose what changes they're going to make. They can choose how many times they want to resubmit it and get feedback. So it gives them a certain amount of control over this. I think it's quite good from a point of view of self-efficacy. It's building up their ability to improve this text in steps, their writing in steps, and it's giving them hints and making it a manageable task, and also showing how they're improving. And I think it ticks a box in terms of curiosity. It triggers curiosity because it doesn't give you the exact answer. You know there's a problem in there. And so what students are doing is revising those texts in order to see how they can get rid of that highlighting. So I would take as an example of how you can look at developments in the future and see, are they really likely to be helping learning? And I think that's all I was going to say at this point. I'm not sure how I did on time.
You did superbly well on time. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, can I just, again, feel free to ask questions based on Ben's talk. And I just want to start with a question from Gerard, which is related to what you've been talking about, Ben, as well. And Gerard says, relevance when learning is very, very important. In my own experience, one of the biggest driving factors for learning a second or even a third language is necessity. You know, how relevant is it to your life? How can we get learners to understand this? And how does that fit in with the principles, Ben, that you've been talking about? Can you share some of your thoughts on this?
No, I agree completely with him. And I think we did have it under engagement. I think that was one of the impact factors, was relevance. To what extent is it useful to you, or interest, or relevant to your interests? Obviously, and again, I think this comes back to Tim's point, that sometimes these can be seen from a very adult point of view, where we might think of language skills being useful for applying for jobs or things like that, or in our work or studies. But with younger learners, and the younger they get, the more difficult it is to show that it is useful to them. And therefore, I think the relevance starts to be more about interest, making it more relevant to their areas of interest. And that's what you'd be looking to trigger.
Absolutely. So even in a classroom setting where we can maybe see that there's less necessity for learners to be learning Spanish or French or English, teachers can still tap into that idea of interest. Great, yeah. Ben. And just one more question on self-efficacy. I want to pick up on that concept, which I think is fundamental to success in anything, as you said. Can you maybe give a little bit, think through some more specific examples of how teachers can develop self-efficacy in their learners?
Well, I think there are different dimensions. I think one of them, I think, is the way that you give feedback to learners. And certainly, if feedback is purely pointing out the errors that people have made in their performance, you're not really building up a student's sense that they can do it. So I think that more selective approach to feedback, looking for positive things that they've achieved, and looking for just a few key points of correction or improvement that they could focus on, I think helps build that self-efficacy for teachers.
That's a really, really good way of describing it. Yes, thank you so much. And Ben, I have to say, I loved your head, heart, hands approach to this. It's just so intuitive and such a good way to think about aspects of learning. Thank you so much, Ben. Over to our final member of the panel, and that's Hanan Khalifa. Hanan is Director of Education Transformation Impact at Cambridge Assessment, and she leads a cross-divisional team of experts that work on research in language learning, teaching, and assessment. Now, Hanan herself comes with a solid background of working in developing language education. She has worked with ministries of education, and she brings a broad range of expertise in terms of language testing, education assessment, monitoring, evaluation, research methodologies, and to mention a few among her other accomplishments. Hanan is going to talk to us about impact and the role of impact in considering education. So over to Hanan.
Thanks, Evelina. Whenever I hear people talk about me, I feel just old, because this is like my career, which you've just summarized. So thank you for that. I'm glad to be the fourth speaker, because that allows me to reflect on or tie in on the other three speakers into my talk. Because whenever we think about the future of education or of learning, we should also be thinking about impact, the impact of any of the initiatives we may have, and how do we go about investigating it. George, next slide, please. Hello. Yeah, thank you. Impact starts with a theory of change, with the why behind our work, and this is critical to answer the why, which drives our activities, which then creates our outputs, which leads to change or outcomes in our stakeholder communities, which we can measure using indicators. Our approach, impact by design, translates the theory of change into actions. And when I mention our approach, it's actually an approach that Dr. Mike Milanovic and Nick Saville have put together in maybe, I think, around 30 years ago, but it is still valid. Next slide, please. We have been advocating impact by design concept, which has 4 maxims. Maxim 1 is about planning. This is where we ask the why, ask ourselves, what are we trying to change? What kinds of values do we provide? What should we measure? And a key point here is that we need to be honest about what the challenges we expect and how they might be met. Moving on to Maxim 2, it's about supporting your stakeholders during a change initiative, critically evaluating the support provided, whichever that support might be. I think earlier today, Dr. Iwan, our Indonesian speaker, was talking about stakeholder agency, and that comes in that is also quite essential to the second maxim. A key point to note here is that listen to your stakeholders and don't be afraid to start again. Maxim 3, not only communicating what you're doing, but actually over-communication in this category is very important. It's essential to the success of an impact or a change program. Moving on to Maxim 4, matching and evaluation, going back to the questions you pose in the planning stage and checking whether they have been answered, changed in the process, etc. Impact by design is a cyclical approach, as you can see, and key to it is the by design phrase, because if you design it, at least you'll minimize the unintended consequences, and you're also would be avoiding what is known as the cycle of planned failures. Next slide, please. Now, how do we go about researching impact? Very important to determine the focus. Is the focus you're researching the strategic objectives of a program or initiative? Is it about the program milestones? Is it about the systems changes? Or is it stakeholder related, the perceptions of the initiative that you have done? Research questions. It may sound silly, but ensuring that they can be investigated and that they are actually related to the focus. Research design, whether it could be quantitative only or qualitative only, and what we have been doing throughout the last few years is actually mixed methods. Instruments, variable. Interview, focus group protocols, anecdotal forms, surveys, observation, tests. Constructs, and I believe that Ben was talking about constructs earlier. Are you investigating learner motivation or learning loss, learning progression, hybrid teaching, parental involvement, or bilingual provision? Next slide, please. This is a picture that's quite close to my heart because it's a program that I've been involved in evaluating and looking into the impact. When you look at the picture, what do you see? You see 2 ladies by a river washing the clothing or maybe washing the dishes. They're smiling, they're looking at somebody else. So there's sort of a social activity. Now, the program that was initiated in this village was the introduction of clean water into the houses. Loads of money was invested in that. It was also they invested lots of training for the housewives to inform them why the use of clean water would, for example, not lead would have better effect on the health of themselves and their kids, no bilharzia, etc. 2 years after the program had finished, as evaluators, we went back to look at the impact, look at the return on investment, and we took this picture. And as we know, that the picture tells a million story. Now, they went back to doing the washing by the river, and the reason being is that for them, it's they're getting out of jail card from the houses they might be living in a 1-bedroom actually in one bedroom or in just a very close vicinity with their mother-in-laws, with their in-laws, and with their or with their siblings. Very compact living environment, and going out to wash the dishes by the river is their out of jail card. It's also a place where their kids will meet other kids, and it's like a crash for them. The moral of this story is really about the importance of context and culture in any kind of impact or change program, understanding it, really deeply understanding it before planning an initiative. Next slide, please. If we want to make the initiative a success, we also need to create conditions for success. As Oscar Wilde puts it, success is a science. If you have the conditions, you get the results. Now, COVID has made us do lots of things, including home schooling. Now, I'm calling this a new breed of teachers because all of a sudden parents and siblings are finding themselves in a situation where they have to teach their kids. How many governments have actually provided training programs for those parents and carers in order to make homeschooling better? Have actually thought about this or not? Maybe Tim can respond to that question of mine. But it's actually thinking about the conditions that you would need to have around the program to make it successful. Next slide, please. We in Cambridge, we have done lots of impact work. People in Evelina's team and Nick's team and Ben's team and Tim's team. So please, if you would like to hear more about our impact research, if you don't mind, drop me a line and I'll either contact you with the researchers or send you the articles that we have. Earlier today, colleagues from Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam were talking actually about the impact of their initiatives. In Vietnam, they've introduced the CFR Vietnam, and we were working very closely with them. Malaysia are introducing a new standardized principles of assessment in higher education, and they're now looking into how impactful that be as well. And lots of discussions are going there as well. So it's not just, so I'm inviting you also to be talking to our colleagues in Vietnam and in Malaysia. I'm going to stop here and say thank you very much for listening to me. Evelina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hanan. I think we all enjoyed the photograph and the lovely story behind it, and really the lesson that understanding the local culture is fundamental to the success of this. I'll kick off with a question about what have you found in the varied work that you and your team do and Cambridge does in impact research. What have you found to be some of the biggest challenges in doing impact research?
Not enough time to understand the culture. That's one, because sometimes you're drafted in to do an impact study because of a political reason, and they say, right, you've got 2 months, do it. And that does not allow the understanding of the culture. That's one. The other one is how to actually phrase what you have found in a nice way. I remember clearly an ex-boss of mine said, Hanan, I read your report 4 times. You're not telling me the truth. And I said, well, how could I say that? But then he taught me how to do it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So yes, culture and knowing how to communicate in a way that's most impactful. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, now I shall open up to the whole panel. I want to kick off with a question from Lai Liati. I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. I'll rephrase it because it's a little bit of a long question, but basically it's about online learning and online assessment. And the fact that some students often leave the online classes that we conduct. So lack of interest, motivation is a problem. And yet, at the end of the semester, we should give them scores about their achievement. How would you advise teachers in this situation to handle a situation like this? So it's a very practical problem. From your more conceptual point of view, what would some of your advice be? Tim, can I turn to you first? Oops, you're on mute. That's the phrase of 2020. still on mute. If somebody else wants to step in while Tim is obviously there's some problem with the technology, I think, there. If somebody else wants to...
Yeah, sorry, okay. It was not unmuting. My button was not working.
Yes.
I mean, I think one of the most important things that we've been exploring is this notion of the seamless integration of assessment and learning. And it's quite clear that we tend to oppose assessment and learning because increasingly around the world, assessment is seen as summative and high stakes. What we've explored is empirical work, looking at where, even in traditional settings, assessment has become integrated into the learning process through rich questions, for example, even with some of those questions drawn from high stakes assessment, but chosen in order to stimulate the learner, make them think. And it can actually carry a number of purposes. Selecting questions of that kind, and we've done that for example, Isaac Physics, for A-level programs, choosing questions extremely carefully, often from previous high-stakes assessment, choosing them on the basis that they will be productive in terms of student thinking. It carries that function, but it also familiarises them with the kind of questions which are typically used to probe student understanding in high-stakes exams. So there's more sophisticated use of assessment being integrated into learning. It's definitely frontier stuff. We've shown it unlocks attainment, it improves equity, encourages levels of learning.
Thank you. So that's a lovely phrase, sophisticated use of assessment embedded in learning. Anyone else? I think Nick probably wants to comment on that as well.
I do want to comment on it because I want to comment on it particularly in the context of language education. I was just reflecting, the other day that it was 40 years ago I became a teacher. And that was at the beginning of the communicative language teaching, learning and assessment era, if you like, when we started thinking about how to teach languages for communication as opposed to teaching language for knowledge or for, in the old style grammar and translation model. So I think we've seen in the last 30 years at least, a convergence between what we are trying to achieve in language education, which is communication, and the design of assessments, even high-stake assessments. So we've seen a move away from knowledge-based exams based on grammar, vocabulary, multiple choice questions towards performance-based, task-based exams, and ways in which we can measure progression across a frame of reference. And particularly important to this has been the work of the Council of Europe and the concept of levels, which both drive a curriculum and syllabus for learning, as well as measure outcomes of success. So that convergence, which we've seen, has helped us in making sure that high stakes exams are not having a negative impact on learning. And we've increasingly been putting into the materials which are being produced and in the support for teachers, ways in which we have understandings about generating the necessary skills. So the concept of positive washback, or now positive impact, is that if you're doing the learning, you're also doing the prep for the high stakes exam. And the micro steps along the way, the feedback and the, as it were, the tasks which you can build up to show your performance as you go towards your ultimate goal of, say, a B2 English or whatever it might be, are now much more convergent and much more, as I was saying, systemic. But the challenge of the future is to build on that concept and to integrate the learning and assessment as if they were two sides of the same coin every step of the way, and to make it more successful, to provide more evidence that what you're doing in terms of feedback is indeed driving the right learning and pedagogical activities which we think are desirable. And in my point is that we need evidence from our learning contexts, which we can gather through data collection, to work out what works well, what doesn't work so well, and then to help provide better solutions as we build up this awareness and understanding.
Thank you. Anything else from Hanan? Hanan.
I'm not sure whether online actually made the difference in the way that the teachers deliver. So if the teacher is delivering in the face-to-face in a very monotone voice, in non-energetic way, then the kids will not be motivated. Yeah. So it is about looking at the way that the online teaching is being delivered, like the delivery mode, looking at the content that is being used, and it's not just reading of the slides or sort of including pair work, group work, and you can do that with Zoom or with Teams. So yeah, so I mean, to me, yes. But. Like, because I see it in my own son. I mean, I hear the teacher giving the lecture and I get so bored, and add to it lockdown. And these are like teenagers. They want to go out. And so it's like a double whammy. So back to the teacher and the delivery. Sorry.
Thank you. Ben, I think you want to comment as well.
I was just going to add on to that, because I think that's absolutely true. And this is the main challenge. Any of us who've found ourselves trying to do training online are kind of feeling it firsthand. The difference between when you're in a classroom, when you're teaching in a classroom, we've all become skilled at reading the room and understanding when people are starting to switch off or get distracted, and then changing the pace, changing the tone. We do all that because we can sense it. But when you're online and you've just got a bank of Zoom pictures, you can't sense it at all, and you lose touch with that. So what I've found is that rather than kind of going into a lesson thinking, or even subconsciously planning to adjust your learning to the students, you're having to predict that in advance. You're having to plan changes of pace and tone, keeping activities much shorter, working out what the interaction is going to be in advance, rather than that kind of responsive way that most of us would have done teaching in the past in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you. If I may just add to this question, teachers were very quickly thrown into this very new situation. So I would say to teachers, be kind to yourself. Don't expect to know what to do from day one, but this is a learning experience for you as well. Experiment with different ways of getting your students more engaged, more motivated through all the different concepts that our panelists have talked about today, and see what works. So see this as an evolving process for you as well. You're going to get better at this as you do more of it as well. Okay, a follow-up question related to this from Shangdong. Shangdong, really nice to see that you're on this call. It's about the pandemic and how drastic this change was for teachers now. What has Cambridge, Shangdong asks, what has Cambridge done to support teachers and learners during this difficult period that we're going through now?
I know that we've been running constant kind of series of webinars and putting out lots of information on our websites to support teachers in terms of different techniques, different materials, resources that they can use, advice on how they can engage students, how they can make use of digital resources that are available. And we're increasing the amount of online resources that are available to teachers, some of them free, some of them wrapped up in courses. So I think everybody's recognizing that teachers have been thrown into a really difficult position and trying to provide as much support and resource as we can.
I think that's correct, because we've been thrust into, or teachers have been thrust into, what was called earlier today, emergency remote teaching, right? It wasn't a planned shift. And therefore, we've gone through what you might call a substitution approach, which is to take what you normally do in a classroom and do it online or with EdTech solutions, which isn't ideal because it's a substitution and not an augmentation or improvement approach. So you're having to come to terms with something to make do, and as it's forced on you. And we've also had to do the same for remote testing, because one of the big challenges over the period of the pandemic is that the normal sort of place-based forms of assessment, of getting people together to be assessed, has not been able to happen. So we've had to work through a process of supporting people in being assessed in valid ways, certainly in English, in remote ways. So I think we've been, again, doing this under emergency conditions. As we come out of the pandemic, I hope some of the learnings from this will remain, and that some of the benefits of what we've been doing, whether it's engaging with learners outside of classrooms or providing opportunities for testing in more flexible ways at home, perhaps, or in different places so that it's more flexible. I hope that will be the learning that comes out of it.
Kanan.
Yeah, I think when COVID hit us, we very quickly started discourse with various governments and ministries of education to see what it is that we can help, whether it's the free materials, giving our time to give lectures or master classes, etc. In addition to the webinars and stuff that is on our website.
Great.
We have a MOOC we've been running for teachers, which I think is approaching something like 200,000 people using it, for example. So the technology actually has come to the rescue in more ways than just online teaching.
Yep.
So the ability to have access to resources which create learning conditions and support both teachers in how they need to adapt, but also provide learners with opportunities which are less boring than just listening to a teacher do the lesson online. I think that's been a big shift that we've been able to take advantage of.
Okay, so I see that Ben has just sent you the link to the MOOC that Nick referred to. So go to the Cambridge University Press website and the Cambridge Assessment English website, and there are resources there that we've put together specifically to help teachers during this time. Okay, turning to another question from the audience. It asks again about the current situation, the current pandemic, and it says, how can teachers in distance learning environments effectively implement and monitor performance-based assessment for meaningful and relevant learning experience? So the focus is performance-based assessment. How can teachers do that in a meaningful way? Any thoughts on that?
How about taking advantage of what we're doing now, video conferencing? We like to do pair work, group work, and so on in classes. That's one of the shifts of pedagogy that we saw in the communicative language teaching movement. We can actually do this now. We can use video conferencing for setting up interactive tasks, for seeing learners actually performing in speaking, particularly in this case, which leads to an observation, which can lead to feedback, which teachers can exploit. We've already heard from Ben about Write and Improve, practice online, feeding into classrooms, perhaps to make use of class profiles of how well people are doing in their writing. So I think combinations of technology and traditional teaching practices are already potentially emerging. So the future for me is how you can do more of that.
Any other thoughts? Tim, you're on mute.
Thank you. I'll jump in on this. I think this very important issue, the balance of human contact and then mediated contact through digital means. I think a couple of things. We've got a wealth of experience from some really, really thorough bodies of evidence that the retention of some form of one-to-one contact is critical in learning for all sorts of reasons. Getting people back onto the right track if they're going down difficult pathways in terms of their learning, keeping them motivated and providing them with systematic feedback. And those things are often, if mediated through human contact, really important. I think Ben showed us how in writing tasks, you can get some really focused, accurate, sophisticated, prompt, and by the way, speedy feedback is critical in all systems, really timely feedback from automated systems. We've also got some very interesting research from Turkey, which says that often young people quite like to have feedback from the machine, because then they're not exposing themselves. They're not exposing themselves to others or to an authority figure, a parent or a teacher. But we need to monitor this. The research enterprise that we need to engage in is to monitor how this is panning out for different people, and the extent to which the balance of direct human contact and mediated human contact is leading to good outcomes. What we know is that the kind of social behaviours of young people, their social behaviour is changing, and that they do use heavily mediated social contact amongst their peer groups. But if we look at the body of evidence about what they're experiencing through that social context, often they're uncomfortable about some things that are happening. The most obvious is cyberbullying. But we know that the patterns and behaviours of young people in the use of mediated digital social contact, that's very important for them. It is changing. We need to monitor it through research so they can be encouraged to use it beneficially for learning, and that educators can use it in an appropriate way to ensure that attainment and equity is guaranteed.
Thank you, Tim. Any other thoughts from the panel? No, if I may just add to following on actually from what Tim said, the idea of social behaviors of young people, they're changing. Social media is very much part of their life, and linking this to Ben's principles of learning, the heart bit, motivation, interest. So try to build some of that into your classroom, because that is performance as well. Some of these hybrid genres of messaging and texting are in fact speaking and writing. They have aspects of speaking and writing. So bring in the emotional life of your learners into the classroom in learning and assessment, because that taps into performance. Do it responsibly, as Tim said, but think of how you can integrate some of that, because it's very much part of their life, and it helps with developing performance-based skills as well. Okay, moving on to another question from Torben, who has a question about motivation and student-centered learning. And the question is, as there is a shift towards more student-centered learning and teaching, are there best practices that you can comment on, or evidence on how those best practices work? So the role of motivation in student-centered learning, best practices. Any thoughts from the panel?
Evelina, I'm thinking that one of the practices that I've seen work really well is learner contracts, but that is more with the teenager and above, not the young learners. And I've seen that sort of a three-way partnership between the teacher, the parent, and the student. So it's not just the student. I mean, we're not going to say to the student, you're all on your own. The parent comes in and the teacher comes in. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Mm.
Yeah. Sorry,
Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, obviously the student-centered learning is about responding to what you're seeing with your students and what they're learning. So rather than just starting from your own perspective of what they should be learning, but really monitoring it. So a lot of it, I think, is around feedback and managing that feedback in a way which is encouraging different learners. And that's one of the things about the Write Improve, which I think turned out to be really interesting when we did an impact study with it, was that it was helping the teachers to give more personalized feedback to the students, because they felt that the system was giving kind of the high level, more obvious feedback of errors, but the teacher was able to then go in on a more personal level and respond in a bit more sophisticated way. So I think it's an example of how you can use the system to do the spade work, and the teacher take a more responsive approach. The one other thing I was going to say was I think often that lack of engagement with learners is not so much to do with subjects and interest, but often that they've been overwhelmed in terms of their working memory on what they're being asked to do. And the teacher hasn't quite understood that, hasn't recognized that there are too many instructions, there are too many bits of information they're having to process, and then they've switched off. So it's not actually to do with being boring, it's to do with being overwhelming.
Evelina, can I just introduce the issue of cost and resources and investment? So we've talked about sophisticated understanding of underlying learning models, and Ben's just referred really to some very important theoretical frameworks in relationship to learning, which have very practical import in terms of the way in which you design digital materials, the way in which you design instructional exchanges. Now, Cambridge is lucky. We've got a huge research facility. We've got a research-oriented staff in respective operational areas. Now, a lot of the things we've been discussing today, integrating them into learning approaches, integrating them into applications, takes a great deal of time and resource. It is an investment-heavy activity. And there's a lot of, what's very interesting is that the work that I've been doing with teachers around the world in terms of digital materials, they really like them free. They really like being able to just draw down freeware, draw down free applications from the internet. We've got used to that in terms of news, of music and so on. And this is a problem for us, I think, because behind really effective online learning, there has to be solid science. Otherwise, the practical things that Ben has just been talking about, they're just not delivered through the applications. So we see that we know that there are well over 500,000 learning applications of many forms, which are immediately available. How do you choose if you're a teacher? How do you choose one which has got the right underpinning learning models behind it, that operates in the right way, minute by minute, for the learners? How do you ensure that the right investment has gone into a particular application to make sure it meets sort of even minimum criteria in terms of meeting these scientific criteria? I mean, that's a very challenging area, I think.
It is.
And I could add to that, Evelina, because I think we were talking about the integration of learning and assessment, and we know for assessment that it's very important to validate the claims that you make. You have to have a validity argument for your assessments. If you want to align learning to assessment, you have to have your science of learning and your science of assessment in some kind of alignment, and you need to bring forward the evidence to support the claims you make about how people learn and what is helping learning or not helping learning. That picks up on Tim's point to some extent, because it's very easy to produce technology which looks nice and shiny, but is and can be used. For example, game-based learning. The claims about game-based learning need to be validated against the theory of learning. And so in what way would gamification help? Now, that is a locus, that's a place where research can be carried out based on hypotheses of what happens, collecting data and validating what happens with regard to measures of success and so forth and learning outcomes. It's quite clear that games engage people in an immersive way. They entice you to carry on, to be persistent, to want to spend a lot of time on it. These are all things which we know from theory are useful in helping people learn things, putting in the time. And the motivation is in games is what I'm interested in or what I've been inspired by another adult person in the way that Tim has suggested. So if you get inspired and you get motivated to do something, you create conditions for learning. How can you harness that for, in our case, helping people learn English? That's a research question as much as it is a practical sort of challenge.
So lots of food for thought. I'm going to finish with one final question, and I would like the panelists, the panel members, to just respond briefly to that if they can. And the question is from an anonymous. I don't know who this person is. How do you see the teacher's role for the future? So the teacher's role for the future.
Well, for me, I think the idea of the teacher is still remain as a human individual, supporting and understanding the mind, the outcomes, the aspirations of an individual remains absolutely fundamental. And what we haven't discussed today, but we know is part of the picture, is technology enhanced professional development for those teaching individuals. And thank goodness that's as much a part of our thinking as the way in which technology can support learning.
That's right. Thank you, Tim. Hanan.
I think teachers will, there will be more emphasis on them being mentors and coaches, especially about mental health and well-being. And I think the relationship would get closer actually rather than further away as a result of COVID.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, I don't think the requirements of teachers is actually changing in any fundamental way. It's really the same thing. I think what's changing is the tools that are available to them, so that they're able to use technology to do some of the things they might have had to do themselves, and able to focus more on the things which can only be done by human intelligence.
Thank you, and Nick.
In part, I answered this in my presentation, but I think the teacher, the human teacher, will be needed in conjunction with technology. And I think that getting that balance right requires teachers to learn new skills, as always, and to be supported by others, and also potentially, as Tim says, by technology to help them. So the digital assistant for the teacher to help her focus on what she can do best, perhaps taking information curated by a machine which has collected lots of class data to sort of nudge the teacher in the direction of what would make the difference under the circumstances which are emerging in her classroom. Now, this is a very sort of interactive model, which I think is what we'll be looking for in the future.
Exactly. And teachers need to be proactive in shaping that model and not just wait for it to happen. Thank you so much. It's time for us to draw this to a close. So big thanks to Hanan, Ben, Tim, and Nick. It's been fascinating for me, even though I work with these people and I'm exposed to these thoughts. It was great to hear the four of you present different aspects. And I really hope that for you, our audience, it's been equally interesting. I can see from the chat that you're both enjoying this very much. So thank you to our audience. Thank you to the panel. And enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Evelina. Thank you for guiding us through. Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you all very much for that very inspiring session. Now is the most experimental part of the day. The focus of this has all been on research. So this next section will be a bit of research for us. We are at the mercy of technology. But we have half an hour now. Some of you have been with us for 9.5 hours, so maybe time to go and take a break. But for those of you who are willing and interested, you can follow one of the two Zoom links on screen. I think they're also available in the chat box. We have 2 rooms set up. There is limited space, so apologies if you don't make it. But the idea is you can go into this room and you will be randomly matched up with 1 or 2 other participants for 2 minutes. So fingers crossed. If you're not interested, just stay on this link and we will be back in half an hour. Thank you all, and thank you for your patience if the technology is a little wobbly. So thank you all very much. Good luck, and we'll see some of you in the networking rooms.